Hi there. Today we're going to be having a look at the Excel questions from the 2014 Eastern Cape preliminary paper. If you have a look at the web page, you'll find the question paper is in a PDF which you can download. Please also download the data files Q3 budget, Q4 ward and thumb, which you'll see I have done in this folder. I'll be having the question paper up in the sidebar on the right so you can follow along. Right, let us start with Q3 budget. Open in Excel and enable the content if you're required to. Question starts, make sure that all the data in column B is visible. And you'll see column B, we have a number of hash characters. This is usually an indication that the column width is too narrow. So very simply, make the column wider. If you don't make it wide enough, it's going to show in exponential form, wide enough that you can see all the numbers. Change the tab color in the 2014 worksheet to blue. So we're going down to the bottom, right click, and you'll see tab color is an option. We can make it a nice solid blue. If it doesn't look like there's been a major change, that's because this is the currently selected worksheet, so it's showing with a gradient. If we move over to the vehicles sheet, you'll see that Ward 2014 does actually have a solid blue color. Right, question 3.3. Add a hyperlink to the word wards in cell A1 to the image thumbs.jpg. Now, I didn't save this in an individual images folder, but we're going to be doing exactly the same thing. So we want the word wards in cell A1. There we are. We're going to add hyperlink. Right click and you'll find hyperlink down towards the bottom of the menu. Hyperlink, and we need to choose thumb JPG. If this was in a separate folder, I would have to go into that folder and choose it. The process is exactly the same. I now have a hyperlink, and if I click on that, you will see it'll take me to that particular picture. In this case, opening in photo viewer there. Right. Next question, 3.4. Remember, registration starts at 6 a.m. daily. Determine the time the secretary will spend at the voting station in K2 if he takes a 1-hour lunch break twice a day and a tea break of 30 minutes. Copy the formula for all days. So we're going to calculate this by taking the time registration ends, subtracting the 6 o'clock start, and also the 2 1-hour lunch breaks and the tea break. So it's going to be equals time registration ends minus the time registration starts. This specifies we're going to have to copy the formula for all days, which means this cell K1 over here is going to have to be an absolute cell reference. And we're also going to subtract the 2 1-hour breaks and the 2 tea breaks. Now here you have to remember that time is stored as a fraction of a day, and a day has 24 hours. So it's going to be 3 hours, 2 times 1 hour plus 2 times 30 minutes, divided by 24 to give you the fraction of a day that this represents. And there we are. Now copy this down to all the others. This would not work correctly if I did not have that absolute cell reference. If I had not put the dollar for the absolute cell reference, then you would start to notice an error very quickly. So don't forget the dollar. That makes us an absolute cell reference. In cell K22, calculate the total amount you'll earn if he's paid 45 Rand 25 per hour for his time spent at the voting station. So we're going to have to add all of these together and place the total multiplied by 45 Rand 25. By the coloring, it looks like these questions should maybe be answered in these highlighted cells, but always follow the instructions given in the text. That is your ultimate reference. And if it says K22, then K22 is where we're going to do our calculation. Your examiners will be looking for the answer in that cell. Now, there is a catch with this question. If I just take sum of all of these and I multiply this by 4525, the system on this computer is set to use a decimal comma. I get a weird 11 Rand 45 amount. How can this be? The answer is, remember that these times, because we're working with the time format, are stored in fractions of a day. So what I'm going to have to do in this particular question is take exactly this sum. Remember that I'm looking at fractions of a day, so multiply this by the number of hours in the day. That gives me, if I look at this as a number, a much more reasonable figure. And I can multiply that number by the rate that we're using, 4525, 45,25. Again, remember I'm using a decimal comma on this computer. This is still showing as a date and time. I will have to show this as a currency format to get the full amount that's owed. You'll see the note, remember to first calculate his time at office in the range K2 to K20. Remember, in your final exam, you only get marks for the work that you've done. So if this calculation depends on adding all of these together, even if you weren't able to do the formula for the time, you need to try and do, as far as you can, the formula for the addition. You can get marks for that. Insert some dummy values. You won't get marks for the dummy values because only the formula get marked, but then you can at least use those in your final calculation. Right, moving on. Each ward needs a ward ID code in cell C2, so we'll be working in cell C2. Create the code using the first two letters of the ward, so we're going to use the first two letters of this, BU, and the last three digits of the ward code, so it'll be BU 016, together with an asterisk separating the two. To get the two leftmost characters, we use the left function, and we're going to have the left function of cell A2. Remember, because my system uses a decimal comma, I have to use a semicolon in this particular exercise now to separate the fields. And if you look at the example just underneath it, you'll see left text semicolon. Pay attention to how your computer is set up. And the number of characters. There we are, the two leftmost characters. To connect them, I could use the concatenate function, which looks like this, equals concatenate. But concatenate has been removed from the latest versions of Office 2019 and Office 365, and been replaced with concat. So it's not fully compatible with all versions of Office anymore, which means I prefer to use the ampersand character. It's simpler, easier to use, and it is compatible across all versions of Office. So we're going to include the asterisk. I'm putting that in inverted commas because that tells Excel to literally show the asterisk. And then another ampersand character because we are now going to join the three digits on the right of ward code. For the right, we use right. Again, I'm taking from ward code B2 and with a semicolon followed by 3 to specify 3 digits. There we are. Right, that gives us our result, BU asterisk 016. But notice the little note after the question, the code must be in small letters, as in the example shown, So I'm going to have to apply the lower function, lower, and I'm going to have to apply that to the result of the left operation. So you'll see here, lower, and then inside the brackets of the lower function, my left operation. There we go. They don't say copy it down. If we did, then that would be the result. There's no mark for doing extra work over and above what you required. So that's all that's required of you. The total due by each ward is calculated by multiplying the number of voters registered. So the number of voters registered per ward by the registration fee per person, which is that one. Use a formula to calculate the total due in cell H2. This is now really simple. We're going to take the number of voters who registered and multiply by the registration fee. And it automatically picks up, because we have a currency in the calculation, that this is a currency, and displays it appropriately. In cell J2, insert a formula to calculate the total still outstanding. And we're going to have to drag the formula down to show all wards' outstanding amounts. Okay, total paid is 0 in this particular case, so it is going to be total due minus total paid, equals that minus that. H2 minus I2. And there's our result. The amount still outstanding at the moment for this particular ward is 270 Rand. I can drag the amount down. It specifies drag a formula down to show all the outstanding amounts. What this does not take into account is that we have not dragged down the calculation of the registration fee. There was no instruction to drag that down, which is why, even though they've paid, we'll see the amount outstanding is negative 1,000. I would have to do that to have an accurate reflection. In cell D25, we are now moving along to D25. Insert an appropriate function to calculate the number of wards. We're going to add all the wards together. Equals sum of the range that specifies here, D2 to D20, and there we are. For the next question, use conditional formatting to format all wards where no payment was made to a red font with yellow underlining. Now, what's not specified is whether we're going to apply this to just the column or the entire range. What you need to do is different depending on the two. The easiest is if we're just formatting the column, and by 2 marks, this is probably the one expected. Format, highlight cell rules where they're equal to, and we want them where they're equal to 0. We want to use a custom format. So now we get to choose the font must be red, so we can choose color is red, and with a yellow underline. So we're going to add a border, and that line must be yellow, and at the bottom. And there we go. The yellow doesn't show up very well in the cell, but it is there. If we had to format the entire range, that's a slightly different approach. I would then have to select the entire thing, and I can't use just the highlight cell rules. See, if I choose highlight cell rules and I choose 0, it's going to show these cells, but the actual wards are not highlighted. So I'm going to have to use a formula rule, and I'm going to apply this formula to this cell. Notice it's already given me absolute cell values. I'm going to take out the one for the row and equals 0. This will allow it to expand down and apply to each row as it goes down. The dollar means it's only going to be looking in this column, the $I. Now we can choose the format, and I can say I want to have a yellow underline. Let's make that yellow. The font must be red. Okay, okay. And you'll notice that it's highlighted everything. Let's have a look at how it's interpreted that rule. Manage rules, and it's chosen a random number from nowhere. So we're going to modify this quickly. That should be I2. The arrow keys do not work inside the formula bar, which I do personally find a bit of an irritation. Okay, that reads correctly. Okay, and there we have our results. You'll notice that now the formatting goes right across the line. I would expect that to be worth more than 2 marks though. So your question probably only applies to the one column. Use a suitable label to add a random number to cell D26. D26 is down here, D26 there, which must be between 10 and 20. In Excel you have the rand between function, so we're going to use that, and you'll notice we get the bottom range and then the top range. So the bottom range was 10, the top is 20, and again, because of my system being set to use a decimal comma, I have to use a semicolon to separate the values, and I have a random number. Ward BU 12 decides to donate money to the election committee. Use an appropriate function to calculate the amount due in cell H27 and use the following data as a guide. Add a column amount donated to calculate the donation. It doesn't really make sense to me that they would want you to place something in H27 and add a new column. We are going to insert the new column as instructed and say amount donated. It doesn't say which side of the amount due this must appear or where the amount donated must appear. So I'm adding this after amount due. We weren't instructed to drag this down, but just to demonstrate that we are going to be working with this particular row, there we are. This is where our calculation will appear. So equals if. We'll be referring to the number of voters registered. So if less than 70 voters, so less than 70, then the amount donated will be 8%. And while not absolutely specified, I'm assuming that's the amount 80% of the total due times 0.08 would be 8%. Also remember that this system uses a decimal comma. Now what happens if it is not less than 70? If it is less than 70, it can be one of two things, over 100 or less than 100. So I need a second if statement to test the over 100 option. This is being applied inside the false section of the first if statement. D12 bigger than or equal to. Notice it says 100 or more voters. So that's not just greater than, it's greater than or equal to 100. And if it is greater than or equal to 100, my result will be H12 times 0,12 for 12%. Then we're still left with the option of what happens in the range between 70 and 100. It makes sense to me that this implies a donation of 10% would happen there, but nothing is actually specified. So this is literally what's asked, a 0 donation. I left out a bracket, which has been added for me automatically. And the 90 is between the two, so no donation was made. However, if we drag this down and up, copy this formula into the row, you will see appropriate donations made for all the different cells. If they had specified that for the range between 70 and 100, a 10% donation should be made, then I would have had to modify the formula slightly, and in this last little cell I would have had to say H12 times 0,1 for 10%. And now that cell does have an appropriate donation. For your exams, remember, always work with literally what you are told. The examiners cannot examine you on something that you haven't been asked. In this particular case, you aren't told to work out any result for anything between 70 and 100. So this would be how your final results should look. You also aren't told to copy this down to anything. So they're actually only expecting that result. The formula, though, still has to be there, even though no donation will be made. The formula is what is being marked. This result could then appear in cell H27 as originally asked. So equals that cell. Add South African currency to the spreadsheet where required. So everywhere there's an amount that is not registered as currency, we've got to make that appear as a currency. And at the moment, that is just the total paid column. So you want to mark that as currency. The currency format for the computer is RAND, so that should show as an R. And that takes care of question 3. Save, and then you can close. Don't just close. It's too easy to cancel and then you've lost all your work. You can only get marks for what you submit. Question 4. Again, if you're asked to enable editing, do that. All right. The spreadsheet opens in showing the table sheet, but you're told to walk in the ward reps sheet. So let's go over to ward reps, and here we have our data. And the first question is in cells D3 to D28. You cannot get the numbers to display correctly. We are missing the initial leading 0. What happens when one types a number, 071, is the leading 0 gets deleted. And this is because it is a number, 71. To get it to display as a cell phone number, we have to take the range of numbers and we have to say that these are text. Now when I type a number, 071, the initial leading 0 remains behind. You aren't asked to fix any of them, and you aren't asked to type anything in, so you can leave it in this condition. But if you were to edit one, just to demonstrate, now we have the initial leading 0. Insert a formula in cell F3. There's cell F3. To calculate the total VAT, 14% of each candidate's fee, which will later be used as a donation to charity. The VAT rate is in cell L2. There's L2. Remember, the VAT rate has now changed. We're now at 15%, but you use the value that's supplied in the question paper. We're going to use the value from that cell. Seeing as it's in a cell on its own, this is asking whether you can use an absolute cell reference for the calculation. So equals this times L2. That would give us the VAT for the first cell. The error comes in when we drag this down and we'd suddenly discover that no donation is being given. This is because I have not used an absolute cell reference for cell L2. To do that, I need to insert a dollar symbol before the 2. We're going to be dragging down. That means the cell reference will be changing L2, L3, L4, L5, as you can see with this last one, L6. By inserting the dollar symbol before the 2, I'm telling XL to keep that part of the cell reference static, so now as I drag down, this does not change. And we can drag that down to calculate the donation for all of them. Use a suitable function in E33. This is E33, highlighted here, to calculate the total amount contributed by candidates from Ward Fynbos. Now, as soon as we're using a particular ward, like this Ward Fynbos, you'll see that Fynbos occurs in several occasions. We're going to have to use a SUMIF. So equals SUMIF, and the first SUMIF, and the first thing we're asked is the range, then the criteria, then the sum range. The range is the range where we're going to be looking at for our criteria. So I begin with this, and remember again, I've got a decimal comma, so the semicolon is my separator character. Criteria, I want to know whether it matches the text. Ward Fynbos. And then we need the sum range. And the sum range is the total amount contributed. So we take we need to go right to the top. Let's drag it up one further. E3. And that should give us the total of all the fees from Ward Fynbos. Insert an appropriate function in cell C35 to determine the total female candidates that will stand in the ward. So 35, C35 is here. We're going to count all the female characters, and again we have a condition. This is equals count if. Our range is C3 to C28. It doesn't show up well on the screen, but that's a semicolon separator character, and my criteria in this instance is F, and it'll display the total number of female candidates as 11. Then insert a function in D36, that's highlighted here, to determine the total number of candidates who have not supplied the organizers with their contact details. Where there's a cell phone missing, that means it's a blank cell. So no fancy count if needed here. This is count blank. And again, choose the entire range, not just those that have no values, and there are 8 which are blank. All candidates are uniquely identified by their ID numbers. Use a lookup function in cell J12 to find the ID number of Mrs. C. Johnson. ID numbers do not appear in this sheet, but if you have a look at the table sheet, you'll find there we have numbers, which means that what we're wanting in cell J12, J12 is here. I'm not sure whether that shouldn't have been cell J3, but let's work with J12. That was the instruction. This is going to be a Vlookup function which refers to that second sheet, equals Vlookup. Vlookup because we're looking down a vertical set of data. It's arranged with the index vertically. Vlookup, the value we're going to look up would be the value from the column in cell B, which has the name, my separator character, the table array where I'm going to look. This is on the table sheet. And don't just choose Mrs. Johnson, choose the entire table array. They're testing to see whether you can actually refer to the entire array, whether this is a generally applicable function. And after I've selected my array, don't forget the semicolon in this instance as the separator character before I complete the function. The next little thing is I need the column index. The column index, this is the second column in the array that I have chosen, which identifies the ID number, so it's column 2. The last thing, you'll notice the optional thing, range lookup. I need to tell it that this is going to be an exact match. An approximate match, which is what it defaults to, assumes that the data is organized in an alphabetic or numeric sequence, and I don't have that at the moment. These numbers are not arranged in any sort of alphabetical order. So I've got to tell it false for this must be an exact match. And now I would have Mrs. Johnson's ID number. If you compare that 261225 to what we have over here, then that is the number represented. Right. This won't drag quite appropriately. It's going to calculate the values, but it only really makes sense if it applies to the cell next to it. But again, remember, you do exactly what is required of you, regardless of whether it makes sense or not. To be more general, this would have had to refer to cell J or B12 in this instance. Now I could take that value and apply it to the whole range. Notice though that I have several little reference errors. This is again because we're not using absolute values. To make this generally applicable, I've got to make sure that my table array stays as an absolute cell value, which I do using those dollar signs. Now I can drag and I will have a generally applicable formula. Seeing as formulas such as Vlookup should be generally applicable, it would be fair to assume that you should use an absolute cell reference to specify the array range. Next, create a chart based on the data in cells G14 to H14 using the following. So G14 to H14, it's just those two cells, using the following. Create a 3D pie chart similar to the example on the next page. That is there. Display data labels as percentages. So let's start with creating the pie chart. We're going to go to Insert. We're going to choose a 3D pie chart. There we are. The data labels must be percentages, and you'll find one of the options in the top quick set of styles has data labels as percentages. If you need to do this manually or yours does not show these options, then if we look at Add Data Element, this is under the Design tab of Chart Tools, you'll find data labels and more data label options where we can show these as percentages. The heading must be Youth 2014, so let's add that for the heading. Youth 2014. The font must be bold and italic. This is a regular font formatting exercise. Bold, italic. Add a strike-through effect, so we're going to choose strike-through from the font options, and a yellow solid fill, so we're going to add a solid background. They left out the italic in the example. I've left out the male and female labels down at the bottom of this example. I could have made life easier for myself if I had used the control key to select male and female as well when I was inserting this. Insert chart. You'll notice now it has those labels. But how do I go around fixing that problem if I've made a mistake of that sort? Well, If I choose Select Data, you will now see that I can edit these labels. Edit, and I can choose the label range. OK, and now I have male and female as required. There was no specification of where this chart should appear, but we probably don't want it floating around in the middle of the screen. If you right-click, we can move chart to its own sheet, new sheet, and the chart will now appear all on its own in a separate worksheet. And there we are. Questions 3 and 4 done. Please remember to save your work. Don't do as I'm doing now and just assuming that when I save it will be saved correctly. It's too easy to make the mistake and press cancel by mistake. This is an exam. You want to make sure that your work is properly saved. Okay. I hope you didn't find that too difficult. I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.